This video brings together the concepts of productivity, specialisation and exchange. So starting off with productivity then, and this is about how efficiently we're able to turn inputs into the production process into output, which really, if you think about it, is central to the whole study of economics, because economics is about making the best possible use of our scarce resources. And the more productive we're able to be, the more output we're able to produce with fewer of those scarce resources. And when we're talking about the inputs to the production process, we're talking about the factors of production. So you could calculate land, labour or capital productivity. And the way that you do that is that you would just take output and divide it by input. And like I said, you could do that for each of the different factors of production, but most commonly you do it for labour, because labour is the kind of the most significant factor of production for most firms. So we'd very commonly calculate labour productivity for a firm. So for example, if you had a firm producing cars, maybe they have 10 employees, they're producing 50 cars in a week, well, their labour productivity would be the 50 cars divided by the 10 employees, and you'd have 5 cars per employee per week would be their labour productivity. Now, if those workers in that car factory were able to increase their productivity from 5 cars per worker to 6 cars, 7 cars, 8 cars per worker, there's going to be some fairly significant benefits of that to both the car firm and to the wider economy. So if it happens on a countrywide scale, then there's going to be significant benefits in terms of economic growth. So economic growth is an increase in the value of the output produced by an economy, an increase in the real GDP of an economy. And if we're more productive, then we're able to produce more with less, essentially more output with fewer resources. So that's going to drive that process of economic growth. And if an economy is growing faster, then that's going to be more output per capita of population, which means that material living standards are going to be increasing for the citizens of that country as well. It also means that international competitiveness is going to be increased. So again, if we're producing more output with fewer workers, then you've got to pay those workers. So the cost per unit of output is going to be lower, which means that our competitiveness when compared to international rivals who we might be trying to sell our products to is going to be improved. It's going to be easier to sell our exports on those international markets because our average costs are going to be lower, and therefore we're going to be able to sell them at lower prices. And finally, each of those factors of production that we mentioned are going to get improved rewards as a result of having higher productivity. So the rewards to the factors of production are rent as a reward for land, wages as a reward for labour, interest as a reward for capital, and profit as a reward for enterprise. And if those factors of production combined are being more productive, then those rewards are going to be higher. So increasing productivity for the firm would mean higher profits. And equally, you could expect as a worker, if you are more productive and increase your productivity, that you could demand a higher wage. Okay, so we'll come back to that idea of productivity in just a moment, because it links in quite nicely with these concepts of division of labour, specialisation and exchange. So division of labour is where we break the production process down into stages, with each worker being assigned a particular task. And so that's really common across all businesses. If you imagine individuals have specialisms, things that they're good at, and so they're going to focus more on these tasks. So if you think about a bit of an odd example of a Formula One pit lane, you've got the guy that changes the tyres, you've got the guy that does the fueling, you've got someone doing the jack, and all sorts of other different tasks, probably 20 odd people all working at once to do quite a complicated task in sort of 7 or 8 seconds. And it's that division of labour that enables that to happen. And specialisation is really a similar concept, but it takes it a little bit broader. So specialisation can happen not just at the level of that individual worker, but it can be a firm, region or whole economy that specialises and focuses in that narrower range of goods and services or narrower range of tasks. So in the UK, our specialisms we'd probably say would be financial services and production of pharmaceuticals. But that's all very well producing that narrower range of goods and services, but that's not going to be much good without this process of exchange, which is the ability to trade those goods and services, because you can't eat financial services or pharmaceuticals. So if we just made those products in the UK, then we wouldn't be able to have the range of goods which we'd need to be able to survive. So you need to be able to trade and exchange to gain access to the full range of products once you've specialised. And so in terms of the benefits of this process, it really comes back to that idea of productivity. If you specialise in what you're good at doing, then it means you're going to be able to produce more output with fewer resources. And a nice way of saying this is to say that you're going to specialise in where you have the lowest opportunity cost. And so that's where you have to give up the fewest different output to produce in order to produce what you're better at doing. So in the UK, we have to give up fewer other goods and services to produce our financial services. In another country, maybe where they're really good at making wine, for example, their opportunity cost of making financial services would be much higher. And so it makes sense for them to specialise in wine production, in what they're good at doing. So if every country specialises in what they're good at doing and where they have the lowest opportunity cost, then we're going to be able to increase our overall output. And that's really what drives countries to trade with each other, because they're looking to be as productive as they possibly can be and produce as much output between them as they possibly can. But the problem with this is that on the individual worker level, if you do the same job over and over again, that can become, as you can imagine, quite tedious and quite monotonous for workers, just doing the same job again and again and again, which becomes quite boring. So the question then would be, when is that going to actually have an adverse impact on productivity, because workers are just getting bored and aren't very motivated in doing their job? So you want some sort of variety for individual workers, and equally you want some sort of variety for countries on a larger scale as well, because if you only focus on, so in the UK, on our financial services, then what would be to happen if we couldn't trade anymore? So we still need to make sure we produce some sort of a range of goods or services so that we can access that full range of goods and services, and the really essential goods like food, if there was to be a problem and if we can't exchange with other countries anymore. So we've spoken a lot about this process of exchange, and thousands of years ago that process would have been done by bartering and exchanging one good for another good. So you've got the baker who bakes some bread and swaps 2 loaves of bread with the butcher for some beef. But there's a problem with that, because that process requires there to be what we call a double coincidence of wants. So each of those different parties has got to want to have what the other is selling at the same time. And that's not always necessarily going to be the case. And so that's where money comes in. And the key function of money is to function as a medium of exchange. And so that means that we use money to facilitate this process. So you can then buy and sell goods and services with your money, and then people can take that money and use it to buy other goods and services from different people at different times. And that really allows us to benefit from that process of specialisation. So without money, we wouldn't really be able to get those full benefits of specialisation, because it enables us to focus on a narrow range of goods and services and then use money to exchange and swap those goods and services really, really freely with each other. It does carry out a couple of other functions in our economy as well. So money is used as a unit of account, which means that we can compare prices of different goods and services, and so it kind of shows us which goods and services are more valuable than the other ones. So if that the loaf of bread was 50p and the beef was £1, then it shows us that the beef would be twice as valuable as the loaf of bread, which is quite important information for us to be able to hold. It acts as a store of value, so we need it to still be worth a similar amount in 2, 3, 4 years' time. Now, inflation does sort of erode the value of money over time, but in most cases and in most countries, the rate of inflation is low enough and under control enough for this to be manageable and for it not to affect the value of money too much. And then finally, also it acts as a standard of deferred payment, which essentially just means that contracts can be made, you can agree a price for something and then pay for it at some point in the future.